I'm Rune, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Aula. And I've been with Aula since the very early days. So I was employee number 6. And I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of the time, the last 3.5 years, building a remote first workplace from scratch, hiring from all the way from Pakistan to Oakland and anywhere in between, and thinking about how we build a high performing and high support workplace that's remote first. So at Aula, we are currently just over 50 full-time employees, but we think about team a little bit differently. So one thing that we'd like to do is to keep our teams relatively lean and then support them and leverage them with a set of high, sort of well-paid and quite senior contractors that allow us to be quite flexible as we find and strengthen product market fit. So our total team is around 70 at this point in time. As we look towards the future, I imagine that we will double again in the next 12 months in line with the growth that we're seeing on the commercial side. So the benefits of having a clear mission and a clear set of values is that you're really able to anchor all of your internal and external communications in some North Stars that you always think hold true. The way that looks at Aula is that we use our values when we do sales pitches to universities. One of our values is to be transparent by default, and sharing that externally actually opens up for a different kind of conversation. And every time we do a company all hands at Aula, we start from the mission, which just anchors the conversation and allows everyone to, if nothing else, guide us if we're not on track for our mission. In terms of the way you arrive at a mission and some values that are valuable for the company, you really want to make sure that you've taken the time to hear the perspectives of the team members. The way that we went about that is that when it came to the mission, that was less democratic in a way. It started from the early founding team, spelling out what was their initial reason for Aula to exist, and then bringing that out to the rest of the organization through a series of workshops to make sure that the initial language they come up with resonated with the team and articulated it and mapped onto some strategic decisions, because ultimately that mission has to help guide decisions in the long run. And then we brought that back and refined it and wordsmithed it, and then ended up with a mission statement that we have today. When it comes to the values, that was more of a democratic process. And we ran a process in a few different steps. We started by going out to the organization, asking a few exploratory questions such as, why did you join Aula? How would you describe some of the peak experiences you've had at Aula? And when you think about taking another job at another startup with an equivalent pay and role, what are some of the reasons why you might want to decide to stay at Aula? And that elicited a bunch of thoughts as to what are some of the things that Aula does well today, and also what are some of the things we aspire towards. And values always sit in that gap between what are you today and what do you aspire to be. Then we took that away as a leadership team and tried to boil that down to sort of a few different strands that were common across everything, and came up with some high-level wording that we ran past the whole organization again for a bit of these connotations the right ones. And then we wanted to make sure that these were not just words on a poster on the wall. We wanted to make sure that this maps onto concrete behaviors that our team members can live and breathe and can recognize or not recognize. And so once we had arrived at these are the 3 values, and at Aula we call them virtues, which is values in action. We went out and elicited sort of feedback on what do you think embodies this value, and arrived at here are 3 concrete behaviors that we think embodies this, and here's one behavior that we don't mean. So any kind of value, you can always oversteer. So for example, creating a place that's transparent by default could be used as an excuse to share anything and everything without regard to how it's shared, and just referring back to, I'm just being transparent. Now, so there's some tension there, and we wanted to just articulate that. Us being ambitious does not mean that we should allow everyone to burn out, because then you can't be ambitious again. Us being transparent doesn't mean you can communicate with that regard for how this is received. Us being focused, uncomfortably focused, doesn't mean that any team can disregard the fact that we're one team on one mission. It's not an operations team on their own saying, sorry, we can't help you commercial. We're just articulating what this really means in practice. And that's where having the whole team to share this is incredibly valuable in terms of helping everyone connect with it. Every candidate that joins Aula, even when it's just say a 6-month contracted position, goes through a virtues interview that is dedicated to exploring the Aula virtues in light of the past experiences of these folks. That is both a selection mechanism. It is also a way of starting the onboarding and setting the expectations right for what we think makes a great place to work. And that then feeds into our onboarding, which we call Aula U, Aula University, where I lead a selection on the virtues, where, of course, it's just a re-articulation of the virtues, but also I prompt the team to actually do some active journaling about what do these virtues mean for you. And how might you display them in your first 3 weeks and your first 6 months, etc. We have leaders, myself included, that fall short on these values all the time. Right, that's just sort of the nature of, otherwise we're not being ambitious enough about what it means to meet them. And so having, hopefully, a leadership team that mostly embodies it and tries very hard to embody it, and having them plastered all over the place so people are reminded to call out when it's not the case, then you have a virtuous cycle. And we found that the particular virtue of being transparent by default actually means sort of has an effect on the other values and the other virtues, because it allows everyone to call out when we're not meeting them. When we think about leadership at Aula, we have, there are a couple of strands to that. One is leadership is not the same as management. And so when we outline at Aula, we've outlined some principles for what we think is great leadership. We call it the unbusy leader and the commitments of the unbusy leader. That is something that everyone has a chance to explore during the onboarding, whether or not they're a manager. And that helps articulate everyone as having a sense of ownership and articulates the way that we think everyone should show up at Aula and show leadership in their work, no matter what their position is. In terms of the actual content of that, we, as you can tell from the headline, the unbusy leader, that is a lot about creating the conditions for yourself where each team member is focused on being excellent at the thing that only they can do. And so that means creating that personal capacity, which is like delegation or outsourcing, to make sure that you have time to think about these things. It is helping clarify the strategy and the vision for a team. It is making sure that the team has the right capabilities and works together in the right ways to achieve that strategy. And it's about making sure that that team has the resources it needs to hit those goals. And then we spend a bunch of time thinking about and talking about what are the actual practical things that we've seen work at Aula. Not necessarily this is how everyone should run their organization, but here are some really concrete observations and trade-offs that people have made at Aula that have made them successful at these kind of things. We're 50 people in the organization, so we don't run structured leadership academies and so on and so forth. One thing that has made quite a big difference to the managerial sort of capacity of the organization is that we've invested quite heavily in executive coaching, both for the leadership team itself, but also in particular for new managers taking on a new role. That has both helped us develop some skills as an organization, but has also helped articulate and refine a particular approach to, for example, crucial, tricky conversations. So I feel like as an organization, we've really learned quite a lot that way. When it comes to performance management, we have decided that Aula is not such a big organization that you need foolproof systems where you know this will just happen anywhere and everywhere and you can make sure that the boxes are checked. We've tried that. It's not foolproof. It's not, I don't think that's the way I would spend my time if I was running a 50-person organization. Another approach inspired by companies like Netflix is to say it is the responsibility of a manager to make sure that their team is both, of course, supported to be successful in their role, but also know where they stand. they have a particular heuristic for what that means, which is, are your team members able to answer, if I quit tomorrow, how much would my manager fight to keep me? And the reverse is also true. If I ask a manager in the operations team and say, if this person were to quit on your team tomorrow, how likely would you be to fight for them? As a way of getting at the question of, are there some performance concerns here that needs to be addressed? That's obviously a very simplified way of looking at it. There can be other things like, I would fight for them, but they still need to grow in this area. Mm-hmm. And where we are at right now is, well, that's part and parcel of what your job is. So we don't provide you like a formal structure. Everyone at Aula does weekly one-on-ones. Mm-hmm. I have once a month, I do some performance notes to all of my team members. Sometimes that's a sentence of like, smashed it, the thing we talked about last quarter, just smashed it. Or sometimes it's like, actually, let's just have a particular conversation on this topic where I think like there's room for you to grow. And I know that you can meet a level of standards that is higher than where you're at right now. So that's way more sort of ad hoc. I'm responsive. I have 6 reports. I don't need a big system. I should spend time with my reports and listen to their needs and be attentive to their particular situations. Yeah, that of course requires a base level of managerial muscle in the organization. If you don't have like guardrails around everything, then you need managers who are able to make judgments, prioritize these things on their own. I think we've made a lot of progress on that over the last year and still have work to do, of course. But this is similar to how we do goal setting. We used to very tightly run a 3-month OKR session, 3-month OKR cycles. And they would always run the same. We would have pretty much the same structure. And we've totally disregarded that, saying that was very useful when we didn't really know how to set goals. Now we've set goals for 3 years straight. Sometimes it makes sense to keep it for every team every 3 months. But currently at Aula, we have 3 goals across the whole company, and it's run in somewhere between 2 and 6 week cycles based on what are we trying to do. Mm-hmm. And so that I think is the ideal state of operations, but it's a hard place to start. At Aula, we have some weekly flows for company-wide communication, which has a few different pillars. It has a weekly all hands, where we discuss whatever is most important for the company. There is a weekly recording that Anders, Aula's CEO, does to the whole organization, sharing what is the state of Aula and his thoughts on some of the most important questions at Aula. Lots of different team leaders share a weekly recording with a progress update. And then we have a social, happens on Fridays, where we do anything from playing Scribble to Werewolf or whatever game folks come up with. And then we have a company-wide dashboard for performance metrics, like how we're doing against our yearly goals, our quarterly OKRs, or the health metrics that we're tracking. So that's the foundation of information flows around how we're doing as a company and where we're headed. Underneath that, we use quite a lot of asynchronous communication. So we're quite a written company. And the way we organize that is through each team and each project having dedicated Slack channels where people write out their thoughts. And once we've agreed on big things, we move them all to our company handbook, which is called the Aula Brain, most of which is public. And for the more informal conversations, we have a simple tool in our Slack called Donut that sets you up with someone every week that is not on your team for a casual catch up about whatever folks care about in life. We have informal spaces in Slack where you might have a group for particular fans of a particular band or a running group or whatever sort of are groups of interest. And then when the pandemic is over, we'll go back to having a couple of company-wide retreats per year for the whole company.